This is Caught in the Act with Tim Clarke.
My name is Tim Clarke and welcome back. They'll go into any court in any town or city on any day, and within an hour, the same word will have been mentioned in relation to one crime or another: drugs. Every judge and magistrate sitting in a court in Western Australia today will likely either deal with a case involving drugs directly, pertaining to the product, or indirectly, involving the partaker of that product. Most of those cases will involve relatively small amounts, grams in bags, but more and more seemingly involve kilograms in sacks and boxes and vans. And the odd one or two involve many hundreds of kilograms worth hundreds of millions of dollars, invariably arriving by sea from far-flung lands, destined for WA's coastline. And then our streets, pubs and clubs, front rooms and bedrooms.
A 6-month-long investigation has scooped $52 million worth of methamphetamine off Perth streets.
Police seized a staggering 900-kilogram shipment of cocaine.
3 more men, including an Australian, have been charged over $1 billion drug discovery off the...
Those who get caught with the major hauls are risking life in prison. But yet, so many still risk it to bring so much drugs into a state with a population that has 1.4 million less people than in Medellin in Colombia, the city where one of this city's Mr. Biggs was recently arrested. So how? How do the drugs get here? Who? Who is sending them here and why? Why do they keep risking life in jail? Is it just the mega profits, or is the gangster life still a viable career path? Joining me to break down and bag up some of these cases is Tom Percy, one of the most experienced barristers working in Australia today. Thanks for joining us, TP. 40 years in this caper, and drugs never seem to go out of fashion.
Hi, Tim. How are you? No, look, it doesn't go out of fashion, and I think it's just starting to gain a bit of momentum at the moment. I mean, you can't watch the evening news, can you, without another mega bust, the police parading all this white powder in bags on TV, seemingly saying, look how clever we are, we caught these blokes. But the question remains, how many don't they catch?
Yeah. Like just some of the recent busts working through their WA courts from just this year. In August, 560 kilograms of cocaine allegedly sitting in a house in Kalbarri, which prosecutors say came in on a bulk carrier. In May, almost a tonne of cocaine allegedly fished out of the bulkhead of another big ship, docked at Kwinana. In March, we had 3 men arrested, having previously been rescued, clinging to an esky off the coast of Albany. That's a 330-kilogram cocaine haul. And in the same month, our police were part of an international flying squad that allegedly launched the biggest bust of all, 2.4 tonnes of cocaine worth $1 billion, destined to come here before distribution everywhere. So, Tommy, all those busts surely show we're winning the war on drugs, right?
No, really? You got to be joking. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. It really is. I mean, WA is a great place to import drugs into because the coastline is so vast. You just have to have a look at the varying locations that those drug busts were done, and just go further north. There's miles, hundreds, thousands of miles of beaches where you can offload as much as you want if you're so minded.
And the police have basically said, admitted, it's impossible to police that whole coastline, and there are so many little inlets for little ships and boats to wobble in on. But notably there, a lot of those bigger busts recently have been cocaine, whereas, you know, in recent years it's been meth that's coming in. What do you think's driving that? Is it just the price, or is like fashion? Is, you know, the 80s coming back? So the drug of choice of the 80s is also coming back. What do you think behind that?
No, look, I've never been told anything about that as to why the reason behind it be. I still think you would find that there was an enormous amount of meth coming in. I think they can probably make meth more easily domestically here than you can make cocaine. So that probably has to come in from somewhere else. Whereas the meth, they have meth labs here all over the place, and that can be done easily here. But I wouldn't have thought there's any change in fashion. Methamphetamine is still very, very popular and used very, very widely.
I did a case recently where a chap was actually caught on telephone intercept talking about how the price of cocaine had gone through the roof during COVID times because it was so hard to get because of the supposed hard border there at Eucla. And so any product you could actually get in was worth a lot more because, people still had their weekend habits, but it was just harder to get hold of. I mean, profits always drive these enterprises at their heart, don't they?
Yeah, look, it's just a question of scarcity, and sometimes there's a lot around, sometimes there's not, and the price does vary a bit. But the COVID period was one which no one knew where the price was going. I think things have stabilised a bit now, but in Western Australia is a very good market for drug dealers because the penalties are so high here. Now, intuitively, you'd think, well, if we have very high penalties, very long sentences, higher than any other state, why would anyone deal here? Well, they really don't want to deal anywhere else because it's so precious and they can get a lot of money for it.
Now, of all the cases I've just mentioned, the oddest one of recent times, certainly that I covered, involved the most unlikely bit of Western Australia, the Abrolhos Islands. It's about 70 k's off Geraldton. It's a great fishing spot. It's beautiful. It's natural. It's pristine, really. But this case involved wrong numbers, rotten weather, a yacht from Madagascar, a skipper from France, a crewman from Wales, and a whale which began the downfall of a smuggling plot which was part Pirates of the Caribbean, but more parts Carry On Cruising.
It's understood WA police are close to charging a man they allege was a major architect of a $1 billion drug haul.
The owners of this yacht chose a bad day to hit a reef.
The alleged criminals already knew the gig was up.
In 2019, a syndicate which was based in Thailand and Jersey put in train a plot to sail a yacht from Madagascar across the Indian Ocean with a mid-ocean stop along the way. That stop was to rendezvous with an Asian mothership crewed by big blokes in black, armed with guns, so they could pick up the cargo. That cargo turned out to be a tonne of top-grade narcotics, ecstasy, cocaine and ice. The yacht was skippered by a French national by the name of Antoine de Centre and his younger British crewmate, Graham Palmer. They were an odd couple who, on their way to flood WA with 380 kilos of cocaine, 344 kilos of ecstasy and 171 kilos of meth, also stopped to watch a whale off the bow of their yacht, with De Centre actually getting out his phone to film the spectacle. Unfortunately for him, he didn't stop recording when the whale stopped breaching, and thus recorded what a prosecutor later told me was the worst butt dial in history, recording himself and his crewmate actually unloading the drugs. Let's have a listen.
Take the top ones and put them inside before the other boat comes. You hear me? We have to put it inside before the other boat comes.
Right, are we moving now, yeah?
Yeah.
Tom, you've been defending bad guys for many, many decades, but do you ever still get surprised how criminals manage to get themselves caught sometimes?
Well, there's sometimes an element of Monty Python about all of it, Tim, and I think that one had a lot of it. And, sometimes you just wonder, how did you think you ever were going to get away with this? And I think the question you asked at the start of the program was, why do they keep doing it? Given that we've got such heavy penalties and they're likely to get such long terms in jail, the answer to that's quite clear. None of them think they're going to get caught.
Yep.
They think the chances of getting caught are so remote that it doesn't affect them at all. And I never met anyone who committed a murder, for instance, who ever gave the slightest thought to being caught. and drug dealers are exactly the same. If they did, they wouldn't do it. But driven by money, they come up with the perfect plan, or what seems to be the perfect plan. Getting caught is not in the equation.
Yeah. And do you find that that's a difference in thinking that you find regularly in the courts, or have found regularly? That's, if someone came up to me at the Raffles tonight and said, "Mate, I've got this plan, right? We're gonna meet a ship in the middle of the ocean, stick a ton of drugs on board, float into the Abrolhos, and then give it to 3 blokes in a van." I mean, I would, you just laugh at them, but this is actually what these blokes did, and it's one of the crazier plots, but not actually too out there when you've been doing it as long as you have, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the foreigners don't understand that whilst the coastline is remote, that there are ways and means that people are likely to detect you. And they try to put out of the equation radio surveillance and digital surveillance and things like that. Mind you, the chances of getting caught are not particularly good. And it takes just a certain type of risk-taking attitude. I mean, some people still smoke, and we know what the damage there is and the likelihood of that coming unstuck for you. Some people still drink drive, and we know that what the chances are. I mean, human experience is that some people are more prone to taking risks than others. And I think they're the kind of people who are seduced by a large amount of money, and the risk suddenly becomes very secondary to them, to the extent that it just doesn't exist, and as a result they get swept up in these kind of plans, and where they sometimes end up.
And the blunders didn't stop there for our crew. After a 7,800 kilometre voyage in brutal weather across the Indian Ocean, Descender actually did make it to the Abrolhos, and then he promptly fell asleep, leading to his yacht and its precious cargo running aground in the tricky, shallow waters around those islands. That led to panic, obviously, which was evidenced in messages sent to the syndicate leader, alleged mastermind British man John Alexander Roy, who was on the end of the phone in the UK. Meanwhile, the 3 men who were supposed to be picking up the drugs in the Abrolhos and taking them to WA, Jason Lassiter, Angus Jackson and Scott Jones, had also made their way to the islands on their own faster boat. But they also managed to get themselves run aground as well. So after the yacht had been found and abandoned, authorities began a major search and rescue mission. And with no crew on board, they thought the 2 or 3 or however many it might be in serious trouble. So they eventually found Descender and Palmer on Burton Island, a tiny little rock in the middle of nowhere if you look at it on Google Maps. But they were there, along with 40 duffel bags stuffed with the drugs hidden by rocks and seaweed. When the authorities saw them from the sea and the sky, Mr. Descender and Mr. Palmer tried to make a run for it. Where they were going to go, I have no idea, but they didn't even get that far because a large seal that was on the island actually reared up and stopped them running before they could get as far as they hoped they could.
There was nowhere to hide, allegedly, with 1 tonne of drugs worth $1 billion, 40 duffel bags filled with meth, ecstasy and cocaine.
Tom, you've heard a few tall tales in your time, but this one has to be up there. Have you ever had a client of yours stopped by a large sea creature before?
No, look, that's right up there with any story I've ever heard in 40 years in the game. And, I still marvel about just the incredible stupidity of the whole enterprise and the bad luck that they had too as well. I mean, it's quite often a bit of bad luck that brings these things about, but, no crime's perfect, and they've always got to weigh the luck factor into it because that can be a determining factor in the end.
Yeah. Now, this case did go to trial, and on a more serious note, it was a major trial. It went for a long time, took a lot of resources, a lot of barristers, a lot of legal minds went into some defences. Mr. Palmer pleaded guilty. Mr. DeCenter eventually pleaded guilty. The skipper, Mr. DeCenter, was eventually jailed for 26 years with a non-parole period of 18 years. His crewmate got 22 years with a minimum of 15 to serve. And the three men in the other boat, they're all now serving between 33 and 25 years in prison. And as a side note, police have interviewed Mr. Roy in the UK twice and have said they intend to charge him once he has served a long stretch for a separate major drug bust on the other side of the world. So they're huge terms, like top of the Wazza prison terms, Tom, with general deterrence always one of the prominent factors. Just tell the listeners what the general deterrence argument is.
Well, we used to think when you go to the jail, the people doing the long sentences were the murderers, but they're not. They're the druggies nowadays. And the theory is, so it goes, is that if you give enough people long enough sentences, then it deters other people from crime. And that's what we call the doctrine of general deterrence. And it's written into the laws here. They have to, every judge sentencing someone has to take it into account that the sentence they pass will send a message to others who might be minded to commit a similar offence. But in recent times, and I'm talking the last decade or so, it's come under a lot of scrutiny as to whether it actually works. And most of the evidence is that it doesn't work because, as I said before, most people don't think they're going to get caught. So it doesn't matter what sort of sentences other people are getting. If you're not going to get caught, it's irrelevant to you. And, quite frankly, after 5 years, who will have heard of any of these guys? Who will know about them? They just drift into the prison sentence and some probably die there. So, a lot of judges have recently started to query just how effective this is. There must be other ways that we can tackle the war on drugs rather than just jailing our way out of it, because the war on drugs started with Richard Nixon in the US in about 1966 when he said, we're going to have a war on drugs. It won't be long till we win it. Well, it's still going, and quite frankly, we lost.
So, as you just said, those big terms don't seem to be putting people off, because all the major busts in inverted commas that I detailed at the top of the podcast have actually happened since this crew was actually sentenced. So if those big terms aren't putting people off, what do you think would? Is there anything that's going to ever stop that 1%er mentality trying to beat the system and beat the authorities?
Well, I don't know if it's 1%. I think it's a lot higher than that. But I think, if you go back to 4 years ago, I think when John Quigley announced to the world that by introducing life imprisonment for 28 grams, I'm not talking 28 kilos or 28 tonnes, 28 grams, it would stop the drug dealers in their paths. And his word were, we will cut the head off the snake. Well, the snake's still out there and the head's still well and truly attached and it's breeding at a rapid rate of knots. So there's got to be a different approach. It's all to do with education. It's to do with treatment. Now, I think what the countries that have been the most successful in sorting out their drug problem are the people who attack demand, not supply. Now, it's all very well for us to get all the suppliers and the dealers and everything like this. But what you've got to do is stop people wanting to use drugs. And if you can curtail that, even 10%, you'll see a correlative reduction in the amount of people who want to supply it, because the market goes out of it. It's a bit like cigarettes. When I was a kid, brought up in a pub in Kalgoorlie, everyone smoked. I mean, 90% of the people smoked, and they chain smoked all days long. Now, you go to that same pub 50 years later, no one's smoking. No one's smoking at all. And we fixed that without putting one person in jail. So the idea is that you've got to have education, you've got to promote the damage that it does, you've got to treat the people who have a problem, and eventually you'll slow down demand. At the moment, governments just think, we attack the supply. No one's ever put anyone in jail for smoking methamphetamine. It's only possession and dealing it that actually attracts the penalty. So I think we've attacked it the wrong way around, and unless we want to get the same sort of thing, let's just pretend that by putting people away, more and more people for longer sentences, that will sort the problem out. But I can tell you, it won't.
It also struck me when I was listening to the sentences of Mr. DeSanta and Palmer and watching them trudge away down the steps at the district court there. General deterrence is supposedly for all of us, but they're not from Western Australia. They're not even from Australia, but they're now going to spend a large proportion of their adult lives sat in a West Australian prison. Do you think that's the way it should be done, or should they be allowed to serve their sentence nearer their families?
Well, I think there is an international exchange of prisoners legislation. It's not widely used, and there's a transfer of prisoners facilitated under Commonwealth legislation. I think it's probably better for their own rehabilitation if they get sent back over there. But usually they're not. And as you say, they're foreigners. I mean, it's not as though they've got a wide circle of friends there who'll be trembling in their boots as a result of the sentences passed. No one will know about it, really. Half the lawyers in Perth wouldn't know about it. So, in terms of sending a message, it's ridiculous. The other one is, like the Asian drug traffic. Some of those don't speak any English. So how are the word's going to get out in Western Australia what sort of sentence they got? Most people just take no notice of this. A lot of it doesn't make the TV. A lot of it doesn't make the newspapers. So what sort of general deterrence is actually going on, and the effectiveness of it is open to question.
It sometimes feels to me like it's a bit of an auction of how much drugs can we seize? The largest, the headline of the largest seizure in West Australian history, I think it's been written about 10 times in the last 5 years. And as you say, the police do, we actually call them show and tells in the industry. They lay the drugs out on the table and lay the cash out on the table, and it makes great vision for 30 seconds. But as you say, it doesn't seem to be having an impact on those that are determined to deal in those figures and numbers and substances.
Well, I think as we said before, look, that's meant to say, look at us. We're getting on top of the problem. We're sorting it all out. These blokes are not getting away with it. But it's a tip of the iceberg thing. And I'd suggest to anyone listening to this, every time you see one of those show and tells on Channel 7 or 9 or whatever it is, just think, that is the absolute tip of the iceberg.
In terms of defence strategies, if you had been, this one had come across your desk a few years ago, and your client was determined to plead not guilty, what would you? How do you go about sort of planning or strategizing what a trial might throw at you and what you might throw up as an argument?
Well, I think that depends on what your instructions are, what your client's story is. You don't sit down and say, well, this amount of drugs come in, what will we say, how can we defend this? You've got to find out what the person says. I mean, they say, we didn't know about this, we thought we were importing a different legal substance, or we were forced to do it. You might have a defence of duress. I've seen that run from time to time, that people were forced to do it in threat of their life. Some people say they thought they were bringing in, nicotine or tobacco or something like that. They didn't know what was in the bags. They thought they were doing something else. There may be many ways in which these cases can be defended. It depends what the person's case is, and they will tell you that. So I think it's generally wrongly thought that lawyers come up with these defences. It's not. The client comes up with the defence, the lawyer just articulates them in court.
Yeah, and that's a common misnomer, isn't it? That someone knocks on your chamber's door and sits down and says, "How are you going to get me out of this?" So, what story are you going to come up with? Whereas it's actually, it's not actually. It's always nice to meet you. We've been presented with a set of facts. What do you say about them? And then go from there.
That's right. I mean, you just need to say, well, what do you say? Fortunately, by the time they get to me, they've always got a solicitor involved. So the preliminary questions have always been asked. I mean, sometimes you're asked to put your own touch to it as to how you can best run that angle and what evidence to call and how to deal with it in the court. But by and large, the basis of the case theory is already distilled by the time it gets to the counsel who'll be appearing in the court.
Okay, I'm going to get you to open your massive filing cabinet inside your head and ask you some of the strangest cases that you've ever been briefed on. No names, no pack drill, but can you unveil a couple of the weird ones that you've had to defend over the journey?
It's a pretty ordinary question without notice.
Sorry, mate.
I remember I did a case up in Geraldton once. There was a situation where the two drug junkies were asked if they'd been involved in killing a bloke because he was a witness in a court case against X. So X said to A and B, "Look, if you can get rid of this guy, I'll give you some drugs." And they formulated a plot to lure him to their caravan park, and they were given a couple of ounces of, a couple of grams of LSD or something like that. I think it was heroin in those days, to use on him to make him unconscious and then dispose of him. But while they were waiting, they used all the heroin themselves. So they didn't have any left when the bloke turned up for his appointment with them. So they had to kill him with a hammer. Of course, they left blood everywhere around there on the carpet in the caravan annex. So they thought, well, we'll get this. They thought they wouldn't wash it down, so they actually cut it out, in a zigzag fashion and then put it in a bin. And so when the police come here, they thought, that's pretty interesting. This is a zigzag pattern cut out of the carpet. And it wasn't long before they found the part, which was this is in the early days of DNA, and of course they were able to match the DNA on the carpet to the deceased, even though they didn't find him. I think they'd actually put him in a boat and take him out to sea. But it was really Keystone Cops kind of theatre as this case unravelled. And
no, I
don't want to have the verdict, do you?
No, I didn't ask, and I won't, because it was, as you say, a question without notice. It does bring me on, just off the top of my head, though, that we were laughing then, and obviously that's a very serious situation for all the people involved. I've always found that lawyers and journalists share that sense of humour that is slightly dark to get them through the dark things that they have to sometimes confront in their jobs. Have you found that over your career, that humour, even in some very strange and sickly situations, has helped get you through?
I think so. And look, I tell all my young students and graduates that you've got to have a laugh at this. If you can't have a laugh, you won't survive in this game. And as you say, people sometimes say, "How could you laugh about something like that?" At the end of the day, there was a homicide involved. But I think even the clients get to have a laugh at themselves sometimes, and I've seen some of them. I've had a laugh with them about the sort of silly way that they've gone about thinking they could get away with things or trying to cover up their tracks. And I think they sort of survive by having a laugh at themselves on occasions as well. Of course, not all of them do. Some of them it's deadly serious, and they can't ever see the humorous side of it even for a moment. But I think lawyers, and I assume you guys too, because you're there every single day. We're there most of the time, but you're there every single day covering a variety of cases. You've got to be able to make light of it at some level sometimes, even if it's a long time after the event.
Yeah. And as I say, when you've got a butt dial and a whale and a seal involved, then it's really hard not to laugh at how the Abrolhos crew managed to get themselves caught and locked up for a long time.
Look, if someone wrote a novel about that, you'd lose the reader because it would seem to be so fantastical. They say, oh, this could never happen in reality. But as I say, truth sometimes stranger than fiction.
Yeah. Well, I think you're in the middle of your second one, aren't you, Tom? So you can borrow
Yeah,
parts
just
of that.
ploughing through it. Hopefully I can get that ready by the end of the year.
Well, we'll do a plug. So Tom launched his first fiction last year, I think. It's called A Curate's Egg. It's a cracking page-turner. I was lucky enough there to be at the launch with some of Perth's great and good. And as I said on the night, I was already looking forward to reading the sequel. So hurry up and finish it, Tom, so we can all jump back in.
Well, if you can get some of those crims to stop inputting so much drugs and give me a bit more time on my own, Tim, we might be in the race to get it done a bit quicker.
All right, I'll have a word. But thanks for your words this morning, Tom. Always great to have a chat.
Okay, mate. Good on you. I'll see you soon.
Ta-da. So thanks again for joining us at Caught in the Act. You can find us on thewest.com.au or wherever you get your podcast, and there'll be some links to the stories I wrote about the Abrolhos crew there as well if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive. If you have any questions, you can email them to us at caughtintheact@wanews.com.au. And please remember, if you want to know what's happening in court, don't get caught short. See you next time.